Hello and welcome to the week 11 overview of the study that I've asked you to read for this week, which is titled, Wouldn't You Like to Talk It Over Before Having Your People Die? Engaging Middle School Students in Interschool Online Synchronous Discussions. This particular study is focused on one specific instructional activity that took place between three 7th and 8th grade history classes, and it was considered an online synchronous discussion, or OSD. So when you see that acronym in the article, that's what the authors are referring to. And just to give you a little bit of information or background on OSDs, we basically have two types of learning frameworks when we're talking about online learning. We have synchronous, which is real time, and asynchronous, meaning it's not real time. You can kind of pick and choose when to participate, which has been primarily the way we've been operating in the EDMA 5240 class all semester. So synchronous discussion goes from the simple instant messaging and chat, which requires everybody to be online or participants to be online simultaneously, going to phone conferencing and audio video conferencing, and then up to a virtual classroom and everything in between. This activity had students focusing on the big question of what justifies going to war. And using this as a big question to frame discussion, it allowed the participating teachers to address different areas of world history from kind of a unique perspective. The authors talk about the fact that in order for online synchronous discussions to be established and be run effectively in school settings, there are a couple of things that need to be supported. First, the teacher does need to provide some sort of instructions and task for the students to engage in. If that's missing, then the OSD is likely not going to be very effective. Secondly, there needs to be some establishment of criteria that will encourage all of the students to participate equally and to be respectful of each of the other participants in the OSD, and generally making sure that everybody is comfortable. Managerial support would encompass whatever the teacher has to do to make sure that the live discussion stays on track. All of you can probably think about what could happen in a live setting, especially when it's chat-based and students don't see each other. And even if it's recorded, the likelihood that they could start talking about something in the current media or some sports-related topic or something that would be totally unrelated to what the curriculum is about. So the teacher has to determine how to make sure that whatever the discussion is occurring is related to the curricular idea. And then lastly, it's important that students understand the online resource, how to navigate it, what the expectations are, all of that kind of information prior to logging in order for the synchronous online discussion time to be productive. This particular activity was grouped around 3 stages, and it basically occurred from it took place over the course of an academic year. So the first stage was really setting the stage and helping students think broadly about the big idea of, what would justify going to war. So there were face-to-face class instructional dialogue and activities that occurred as part of this first phase in order just to provide context, background about war in general. And then each of the classes individually had small groups where they created lists of reasons for what they felt justifies going to war. And then this kind of spewed into a larger class discussion and then eventually into the first online discussion that they had with the 3 classes. And then afterwards, they each debriefed about the online discussion and again looked back at modifying their list of reasons why nations should go to war. Stage 2 of the activity was taking a look at actual historical events, i.e., different wars, and addressing the question about whether war was justified from the perspective of those events. So they started with an undeclared war with France. That was application discussion 1, so that was actually an online synchronous discussion with all 3 classes. They looked at Native Americans in the U.S., and they actually did 2 online discussions with that, one from the Native American perspective, one from the U.S. perspective. Then they looked at the War of 1812 and had 2 online discussions about that, one from the U.S. perspective, one from the British perspective. And then they looked at the Civil War and specifically framed 2 questions that students were supposed to think about and write about. And this was the first, or actually I take it back, it's the second of the data collection points that the authors of the study chose to really examine. So the first one was AD1, Application Discussion 1, which occurred in October. This one occurred in January, and then their next data collection point occurred in February, which was the Spanish-American War, and that was followed by a discussion of World War I, again with some framing questions. The last stage of the activity was kind of pulling everything together. SD was synthesized discussion, and then it culminated in what they called an international conference, which is a United Nations discussion, where in addition to the students and the teachers, they had 3 people coming into the discussion posing as United Nations workers, and the students were supposed to provide justification to these UN workers about whether war would be justified in a specific setting. The authors posed 3 research questions in their study. The first, what characterized the online synchronous discussions as a whole, and how did these characteristics change over the year? The second, what characterized discussion threads within the online synchronous discussions, and how did they change over the year? And then lastly, what characterized high-level participants and how they interacted during the online synchronous discussions? This was a qualitative study, so the nature of the data analysis is different from several of the studies that we've examined so far this year. Basically, the authors looked a lot at student posts over 4 of the online discussions that occurred during the course of the year. So they were looking at who posted, how many times they posted, which school were they from, and then they looked at the actual content of the student posts. And then they identified 5 what they considered to be high-level participants, and they examined the nature of the contributions made by these 5 individuals. So I hope that gives you just a little bit of a sense of the study prior to engaging in reading it. I hope you enjoy it. I think it's a very interesting application of technology.